Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, is joining me. Okay, we got a lot of things to talk about. I talked about earlier, Justin Fields' numbers, you could argue, are slightly better than Eli Manning's through 28 starts. But he was a Manning. Yep. Everybody in the building, Ernie Accorsi, Jerry Reese, he was their guy. I feel like Justin Fields is on a complete island. The guys that drafted him are gone. The new guy's got to win. He's not their guy. He's an easy guy to point at. And Chicago doesn't do quarterbacks right. They can't get it right. What is your kind of sense this weekend between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields and Sean Payton and Matt Eberflus? There's a lot of heat on this game. But where are we today with Justin Fields? What do you hear?
Yeah, I think right now they're in the process of trying to develop him into something he wasn't last year. And the most troublesome thing, Colin, is that the rap on him coming out of college, the thing that he had to improve coming out of college is he had to see it faster. And depending on which coach you talk to, some think you can coach that into a guy, some think you can't. But the reason why he's holding on to the ball is because he isn't seeing it fast enough. And so to combat that last year, they ran a certain kind of offense that they would tell you wasn't sustainable. And playing that way made Justin Fields productive individually, but it got him beat up and they didn't win a lot of games. So the idea was to sort of move that forward this year, and they haven't been able to do it yet. And I think they always thought that it was going to take some time, and the running game needs to be more productive and help them in that effort. But the idea here is to move the ball forward so they get answers on Justin Fields by the end of the year. And again, that's going to be the key, is how fast he sees it. And that's something you can actually watch on TV. There are a lot of plays out there where you see Justin Fields standing still in the pocket and taking sacks. Let's see if he can eliminate those. And he can either eliminate those by getting the ball out of his hands faster or seeing the field faster. One of the two things. Those are going to be the keys as far as his development goes. But this is very much still a developmental year for Justin Fields as the Bears try to find answers on whether or not he can be the quarterback for the next decade.
Okay, so it's fascinating. I said, when there's a car wreck, we all stop on the freeway and look over. Denver, Chicago is a car wreck. I think it's fascinating, but It's a bit of a mess. So it's interesting. Russell Wilson's first half numbers, excellent. Off the cliff in the second. It's the opposite of Jordan Love. So they're doing some things right. The defense has regressed, but it's a new coordinator. So I do feel like there was a bunch of things he had to do. He had to change the culture, the O-line. He had to get Russell Wilson right. Yep. Do you see any light with Denver? I think they win this weekend. Is there anything behind the scenes that we should take positively from where they're at now?
Yeah. I mean, I think a solid foundation was built over the course of the summer. Now, remember, these players have been through a lot, and these players were in open rebellion in December. They weren't happy with where things were under Nathaniel Hackett's staff last year. And I think when you look at that history and now, you've come in and you've had a really hard offseason and you've gone through a tough spring and a tough summer, and now you're not getting results. I think it's fair for players in that locker room to start to ask the same questions they were asking last year. And that's what I think makes the next two games a really critical stretch for Denver. And the reason why is because these should be wins. They play the Bears this week. They play the Jets without Aaron Rodgers next week. These should be wins number one and win number two. And if that doesn't happen, then I think people in the locker room start asking bigger picture questions like, why are we engaging in this very difficult program that Sean Payton's put in place? And then I think for Sean Payton and the general manager, George Payton there, they have to start asking, are we going to be able to win with this core period? Or do we need to retool some things? And that could lead you to putting a Jerry Jeudy on the market, to putting a Cortland Sutton on the market, a Garrett Bowles. I think that these are very real things that over the next 2 weeks need to be sorted out with games that are very winnable. And again, it could affect where the locker room is on Sean Payton, and it could affect where Sean Payton and George Payton are on their roster going forward. And it could affect the trade deadline, which is a little bit over a month away right now.
Interesting stuff. So you always have good connections to New England, or rest of the league as well. Monday Morning quarterback Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter. But when I watched that Sauce Gardner thing with Mac Jones, and I've heard a couple of things over the last 3 weeks on Mac, that, he can be a handful, all right? That was not the first incident. None of his teammates rushed to defend him on it publicly.
Yep.
I don't know where this relationship's at. I don't feel great about Mac Jones and the Patriots now. What can you enlighten me with and our audience with?
Yeah, well, if that little cup check there was an isolated incident, like I don't think it would be that big a deal, but it's not, and that's the problem that Mac Jones has right now. There was the ankle twisting with Brian Burns.
Yep.
There was the tackle of Eli Apple.
Yep.
There was the spikes up into Jaquan Brisker.
Yep.
That's 3 incidents from last year alone. There was the belly aching about the coaching. There were the antics on the sideline. I mean, there was a point late last year where I know all of this had worn really thin on a lot of people in that building. Now, I think since Bill O'Brien's been in there and Bill O'Brien's taken charge of the offense, Mac's been fine. And Mac had a really good offseason, a good spring, a good summer. But the reality is it took 3 games for something like this to happen again.
Yep.
And so I think that this is an important point for Mac Jones now. And I think he missed an opportunity the other day to take responsibility for what he did on Sunday. He very easily could have gotten up there and said, hey, look, like I shouldn't have done what I did. It was a heat of the moment thing. I need to knock that stuff off. And he takes a lot of heat off of himself. And maybe he did that privately. But these sorts of things are things that sort of piled up over the course of his first 2 years in the league where, veteran teammates needed to say something to him about it. And I just wonder something like, and again, he had a great spring, a great summer. He had a really good start to the season despite their record. But for this to come up this early in the season, I think it does kind of cause some eyes to go back to Mac Jones and see how he reacts to this, see how he comes out of it.
Yeah, a little bit of a brat, it feels like to me. So I had somebody who is well-connected, and I have people around USC football, but it was not somebody within the program. But it was somebody connected to it and said, listen, when Caleb Williams came out and his dad came out and said, like, yeah, it's kind of weird. We don't get to say where we go at all. I was told again this week there are a handful, 2 or 3 franchises that Caleb Williams does not want to go to and could make upwards of $10 million next year. By the way, Shedeur Sanders, I'm told, could make $10 million staying, and his dad doesn't want him to go. And people can bristle at that. But Elway and Eli Manning said, we're not going to teams. I do think, Albert, it's a little bit of a reality, and I don't think less of the athletes. The Caleb stuff, I think he's going to go pro. But when you're hearing the same stuff, what do you make of those rumors? How do they land for the NFL? Like, Chicago can't get quarterbacks right. I wouldn't want to go play if I was a quarterback in Chicago.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question, though, Colin. Like, how many teams out there wouldn't throw their starter out right now for Caleb Williams?
5.
The list is probably short.
6.
Right?
I mean, seriously, 6.
I mean, I can't name, I think there are legitimately 25 teams in the league right now that if they had the first pick would take him and would just manage whatever else is going on their quarterback depth chart after that. So, like, that's the type of prospect we're talking about, a guy who has the leverage that a Peyton Manning had in 98, that Andrew Luck had in 2012, that Trevor Lawrence had in 2021. He's on that level, or at least he's seen that way right now by NFL scouts and coaches who have studied him. The thing you're talking about, right, like, which has obviously created some headlines, I can just tell you, talking to NFL teams, their biggest question is how much of that is the kid and how much of it that is his dad. And they wonder, when it comes down to it, will the kid be willing to push nuclear buttons here? And I'd actually argue, Colin, it might be easier to pull an Eli Manning than it would be to pull a Peyton Manning and go back to school, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like where Peyton Manning went back to school and didn't wind up playing for the Jets, wound up playing for the Colts coming out the next year. Eli Manning just forced his way to the Giants. Well, why would you want to do that if you're Caleb? Because the big money is in the second contract. And the minute you step foot on an NFL practice field, your clock starts towards your eligibility, towards getting a second contract. It's 3 years that you have to wait. And by the time Caleb Williams is eligible for a second contract, we may be talking about $60 or $70 million a year.
Yeah.
That's where the real money is. And so if I'm Caleb Williams, and again, like, I think NFL teams have a lot of questions about this. And the question is, like, how much of this is the kid? How much of it's his dad? Would the kid actually do it? But if I'm Caleb Williams and I'm serious about forcing my way to the right situation, I'm probably doing it by entering the draft and forcing a trade rather than waiting for an extra year. When you wait an extra year, you could be in the same sort of situation a year from now. So again, I'd say pull an Eli Manning, not a Peyton Manning, if you really don't like the team that has the first overall pick, and force yourself or force your way into a better situation.
So I don't think, final question, I don't think the Jets should fire Saleh because they wouldn't have if Aaron Rodgers was upright. I don't feel it's fair to fire a guy. He built the defense, great passion, loved by players. It's not his fault. The old line gets Aaron hurt again. So, but I wasn't in on the Kirk Cousins or the Carson Wentz rumors. The Tannehill thing is interesting, though. Tannehill, if you go look at Tennessee, run game, one-star receiver, defensive coach, shaky pass-blocking offensive line, that he was a number one seed with that. He's a big, strong quarterback who may have limitations but could handle New York, Texas A&M, Miami. He's been in a lot of big games. Tom's last Foxborough game, he won it. I think Tannehill to the Jets, if Zach Wilson unravels this weekend and next, and Tennessee can't win games and thinks, we got to see our young guys, is Tannehill Jets at least a little open? It feels like it is.
Do you know of the connection there, right, too? Like his offensive coordinator in Tennessee the last 2 years is Todd Downing, who's now the pass game coordinator in New York. And Tannehill was a guy who was on the Jets list. Now, obviously, Aaron Rodgers was at the top of the list. But, Tannehill was on that list behind Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr as a guy who they were at least going to knock the door on. And I think in this sort of situation, if you're the Jets, the issue you have right now is once you go away from Zach Wilson, you cannot go back. That team was so frustrated with him last year. The players, the frustration boiled over very publicly last year, and you're already seeing signs that's happening now. So if you're going to go away from Zach Wilson, I almost think you have to trade him or cut him because you can never start him there again, right? So if that's established, then we need to find a good answer, and this guy could be a good answer. Here's the other thing about Ryan Tannehill. Because of his athleticism, he can be a part of your running game, and he can help you mitigate the offensive line issue. And so I think if there's like this idea out there that we need to go and get a quarterback who we can compete with and contend with now with the roster that we have, and maybe a bridge to Aaron Rodgers coming back in January, but at any rate is going to make us competitive, and a guy who is in a contract year, so you're not contractually obligated to keep him past this year, so you can turn back to Aaron Rodgers in 2024. This would seem to be the ideal one to go and get. And again, I think the connection on the coaching staff is a huge part of this. The fact that you have Todd Downing in your building, who was his offensive coordinator the last 2 years, will allow you to make your offense work for him.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.